As we have talked more and more about the Pixel Fold, there has been one aspect, one specification that we have not had firm rumors on, and that is about to change in this very video. We're talking about the battery capacity and charging speed of the Google Pixel Fold. We had heard rumors for a while that it was approaching 5,000 milliamp hours, but we don't know exactly what that means. I mean, the assumption there is it's going to be bigger than the 4,400 milliamp hour battery in the Galaxy Z Fold 4, presumably similar size for the Z Fold 5. But what does that mean? Between 44 and 5,000 is a fairly large area. Well, we got a tweet from Yogesh Brar with a full list of specifications, that a lot of these we've already gone over in prior videos, but at the very bottom, he is expecting a 4,500 milliamp hour battery and 23 watt charging. Now, for me, this is a disappointment. This is smaller than I was hoping this thing would actually have, because it is meant to be also heavier than the Z Fold device by a fair amount. So we were hoping that meant the battery was going to be a fair amount larger, but now according to this, we can see it is not all that much bigger. Now, we also have to factor in that the Z Fold 5 will be running the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, and as we've seen on devices like the Galaxy S23 Ultra, that has meant massive gains in terms of efficiency and therefore battery life with the same sized battery, whereas the Pixel Fold is running the same processor as the Google Pixel 7 and 7 Pro, also the upcoming 7a, which, don't get me wrong, was no slouch in terms of battery life, but with the same size battery, I'm routinely getting about another hour or so of screen on time with my S23 Ultra than I did on the 7 Pro. Is that something that can be offset by 100 milliamp hours? I am skeptical that that is the case. It will bridge the gap slightly, but I would expect based on this that the Z Fold 5 should have slightly better battery life than the Pixel Fold. Although one place that might save the Pixel Fold a little bit of battery life when you're using the cover display is the resolution of that display. So we know that it's a 5.8-inch display running HD+. Now, since we don't actually have the resolution here, we can only kind of make estimations here. But HD+, according to Google, is defined as being 1600 by 900 when you're running in a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, which it will not be a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. Okay, something like the Z Fold 4 cover display is running at 904 by 2316. So it's 900 pixels across, and then 2316 because it is very, very, very tall. So this could be sort of described as like HD plus, but like extra tall, like it doesn't really fit any of the specifications. Whereas the Pixel Fold will be much shorter, but also quite a bit wider. Again, I have here the front part of a case for a Pixel Fold. And if we line these things up roughly, you can see that we're going to lose some height, but we're also going to gain a ton of width. So the overall amount of like pixels being illuminated, rendered at any given moment is probably going to be round about the same. And then when you look at the inner display, QXGA+, it is basically going to be exactly like the Pixel Fold's internal display, like I've already shown you guys, turned sideways. So the screens, I think, are going to be pretty much a wash in terms of battery usage, really making sure this comes down to the size of the battery and the SoC, where I do think that the Z Fold 5 is probably going to have a slight edge. Now, the rest of this is stuff we reported a couple of days ago that initially came from John Prosser at Front Page Tech, but there's one more tidbit here in the responses and the replies. Yogesh says the 10.8 megapixel sensor being used here is also being used as the selfie camera on the Pixel 7 series. So as you can see, the rear cam is a 48 megapixel sensor, and then there is a couple of 10.8 megapixel sensors being used as the ultra wide and the 5x telephoto. If you jump over to GSM Arena, sure enough, that is a 10.8 megapixel camera with 1.22 micrometer pixels being used for the selfie camera. So that does line up. Now, before anybody says, oh my lord, Google's using a selfie camera as their ultra wide and as their telephoto, that is the sensor. There's much more that goes into how good a camera is than just the sensor alone. In fact, when you're talking about a selfie camera, the biggest problem that it tends to have is the fact that they tend to have very small pixels. This does not. This is 1.22 micrometer pixels. They're not like massive, but they're on par with a lot of ultra wide and telephoto sensors and other phones. But then the biggest thing tends to be the glass. Okay, they have to fit on the front of the display, so there can't be a bump. The lens, the glass over top of it has to be very, very small, very, very thin. This is not going to be the case when it's moved around to the back of the device. So I'm not really worried about these sensors, although if you look at this array of sensors, you could make the assumption that they did try to cut cost a little bit. They're not going with the full-blown Pixel 7 or 7 Pro sensor setup here. You can say the same thing about the Z Fold. It is not using the S23 Ultra cameras. It is using a lesser version of those sensors, something more akin to the standard S-series phone. So they're both doing this to save cost. Foldable phones are very expensive to make. So if we're going to assume that the Pixel Fold will have slightly worse battery life, I should also mention it's going to charge at 23 watts versus 25 on the Z Fold 5. That's going to be very much a wash. Although if it gets the wireless charging speeds from the Pixel 7, it's going to be wirelessly charging significantly faster than the Z Fold. While we're making these assumptions about battery life on these devices, when we talk about cameras, I'm going to go ahead and assume that the Pixel Fold is going to have the better camera setup overall when compared to the Z Fold 5. And that's just because I trust the Pixel brand that much. I'm not saying anything bad about the Z Fold camera. It's actually very, very good. It's better than a lot of people think it is. But you're talking about a Pixel Fold with a camera setup that's going to be on hardware terms very, very similar. Okay, better in some ways, worse in others, very, very even. But I just trust Google's processing of their photos more. You're probably not going to have those same issues with motion blur on moving targets when it's slightly lower light. With the Pixels, just like my Pixel 7 Pro, that is the most point-and-shoot, trusted on the first shot camera that I have. No disrespect to my S23 Ultra, to my Z Fold 4, but it just is what it is. That camera is just bang on almost every time I use it. And then you factor in that the Pixel Fold should have a sizable lead in terms of optical zoom, 5x there, when I've not heard anything that tells me we should expect more than the same 3x zoom we have on the Z Fold. And I think, like I said, the Pixel Fold should get the nod there. Like I said in a prior video that hopefully you've already watched, the difference between the Tensor G2 and the Pixel Fold and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and the Z Fold 5, I think is going to be slightly overblown. For most people, day-to-day usage, they're going to be pretty much indistinguishable from one another. Now, the efficiency, the battery life, we've already talked about that. When you're gaming, playing something like Genshin Impact, running emulators, yes, there will be an advantage to having that Z Fold 5 with that better processor, that faster processor, and it will absolutely dominate in synthetic benchmarks. But synthetic benchmarks really aren't that important to the vast majority of people who are just going to use their phones. Like I said, unless you're pushing this thing to its absolute limits by, like I said, Genshin Impact at max settings, you're trying to emulate retro consoles that aren't that retro actually, and you're trying to really push that resolution, you're not going to see a difference in day-to-day use between these two devices, at least for the most part, within a reason. I'm sure there's going to be little moments here and there where the Z Fold might appear a bit quicker, but these are not going to be gigantic differences. We still have to give the nod to the Z Fold 5 there, but probably not a massive lead. Overall, like I said on Twitter the other day, I think that it's going to come down to preference on these two devices, right? You're talking about software. Do you prefer Samsung's software or Google's software? I kind of lean towards Team Pixel on that one. So you may not. You may lean towards Samsung. You may lean towards wanting that performance. You may lean towards the size and aspect ratio of the screens on the Z Fold. That's all up to you. But my point is, these two devices are going to be very, very evenly matched in a lot of ways. Where there are advantages one versus the other, they're not massive advantages. And this is a great thing because it sounds like people are going to get two really good options for foldable devices. Hopefully, I have both of them and I can cover them really, really thoroughly for you guys. Subscribe for more content just like this. If you want to save money on your cell phone bill, check out my channel partner down below, Mint Mobile, to do that, just like I have saved a ton of money by using Mint Mobile. Guys, I'll see you on the next one. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.